Hi everyone, it's Melissa here. If you're new around here, this is normally an art channel, but today I want to talk to you about some tips and tricks for Igcse First Language English exam. When I was doing my Igcse, my English teacher literally told us that you cannot really study for the English language, but evidently from my grades, you can study for it, but you just need a different method or approach in terms of studying it. Side note, this is actually a first video I'm talking to a camera, so bear with me if I sound or look awkward in this video. Without further ado, let's get into the juicy part of the video, my grades. I took the exam in October series in 2020, since the June 2020 series were cancelled. So we were doing evidence grades for our IGCSEs. My teacher literally told me that if I would apply for evidence grades, I would only get a B, but I still wanted to aim higher, so I reset the exam in the autumn series. To be honest, I didn't have high hopes for my English grade because one, I was doing AS level during my FLE preparation period, and two, I was never just too confident about my English. Always quite insecure about my accent or my grammar, stuff like that. So naturally, I wasn't expecting a high grade when it was result day in January. But to my surprise, I got an A star. I got 56 for paper 1 and 68 for paper 2. For the uniform percentage mark, I was in the 92 percentile. I know it's just barely passing the A star percentage, but I don't care. I still got an A star. While you could argue that there was great inflation in the fall series, if you check the percentage for FLE and comparing to 2019 result to the 2020 October-November percentage, it actually didn't change that much. My theory is that because it was a new syllabus, there was some major syllabus changes, the grade boundary was supposed to go higher, but because of the grade inflation in general, it got lower. But so it seems like it didn't change that much. I'm not sure I explained it good enough, so if you are still confused, just comment down below. So you must be wondering, how did I get that A star? Let's go into details of each paper and each question. Paper 1, the reading paper. The first question of the reading paper consists of two tasks, comprehension task and the summary task. For the comprehension task, you will be reading passage A to answer the questions. I think these questions are relatively straightforward and begins the exam in quite an easy start. One thing to note is that because each question worth so few marks, they're looking for very specific points in your answers for each question, which means there's only little space for maneuvering, so you have to stay relevant to the question. When the question states use your own words, it's pretty clear that you shouldn't copy straight from the text and actually use your own words. Okay, let's move on for the summary task. It's kind of confusing, but you will be reading another text B, to write the summary, while technically it's still the same question, the main question. So the key thing to note is that Cambridge has reduced the word limit to 120 words, which means you really have to make it extremely concise while filling up all the points you have to make. When writing the summary, you don't really have to follow the exact order of the points from the passage. In fact, you should change it up the order a bit and group similar points together and make the summary flow better. This really shows the examiner that you have read the passage and that you're writing a relevant summary to the question. They also removed the question from previous years where you have to first write about the bullet points about the summary, which the change might make it more difficult since it's easier to see the points and then group them together in continuous writing. In the case of now, I recommend you to use 2 to 3 different highlighters and highlight different points from the text into groups of arguments, such as each color will represent one idea, one group of ideas. It's okay to underline with the pen that you're writing, but sometimes I find that I have to manually group the points again while I'm writing, which wastes more time, since the underlined sentences are not grouped into groups. The last thing for summary task is that the points are no longer limited to 15 points. What I mean is that you don't necessarily have to get 15 points in order to get the full marks of the question. For the exam that I did in the summer, I thought I didn't have enough points during the exam. It turns out, after checking the mark scheme that's just published recently, that for the summary task, it only has 13 points instead of 15, while the question is 15-mark question. So what I'm guessing is that you will have to include around 15 points in your summary, but in actuality, it might be asking a little bit more or a little bit less. With that being said, though, I know it may sound redundant, but still try to include as many points as possible while being concise with your language. And one tip for being concise is to use connectives. And I will insert an image of connectives here. Question 2 of the reading paper. It consists of 2 types of sub-questions again, but this time it's on text C. The short answer questions and language analysis task, as some of you may call it, the writer's effect question. For the short answer questions again, it's relatively easy and straightforward, kind of similar to the first comprehension questions. Just pay attention for the wording again. For example, there's one type of question, I believe it is something like identify a word or phrase from the text that suggests the same idea as the words underlined in the question. This means that you have to find the synonym of the underlined word, not coming up with your own words. That's one thing to note, because I'm pretty sure that one of my classmates did that during one of our practice. The last question of the short answer questions, it's kind of similar to the language analysis on the next page, although for this, it's like a mini version of it. The words or phrases should be relatively easy to pick up to analyze, since the bit that you have to analyze is already in the question. You just have to make sure you will explain what the phrase means and the effect it has in detail. More of that on the next section of the video. Language analysis. Since you have to write your analysis for 2 paragraphs, the structure I normally go to is 1. Start off with an introductory sentence that gives an overview of your answer, and then choose 3 powerful or unusual words or phrases to be used as evidence to support your beginning statement. So they need to be relevant. Again, this should be relatively easy to identify because the paragraph you need to look like should have a lot of literary devices and filled with imageries. But also try to be selective about the words or phrases. Do not just write the whole sentence and start explaining the effect of the entirety of the sentence. For each word or phrase you selected, you should first explain the literal meaning of the word or phrase, then explain the effect it has and how it creates imagery. As it literally states in the question, explain how the writer uses language to convey meaning and to create an effect in these paragraphs. It makes me sound like a teacher, but I think many students don't tend to explain the meaning and go straight into the effect. But by mentioning the meaning of the phrase or the words or phrase, it might help you to understand and think of the effect easier. With that being said, your analysis for each phrase should be about 1 to 2 sentences max. Because the total mark for this question is 15 marks. It's a lot, but compared to the other questions that worth same amount of marks, you shouldn't be spending that much time on it. And 2, timing for each question. There's a final question where it requires quite an extensive time for writing your answer. So with that being said, let's talk about the last question of the reading paper, directed writing, or Cambridge likes to call it extended response to reading. You will be reading text C, which is the same text from the previous question. So for directed writing, I recommend you to use 3 different colored highlighters again, since your answer have to reference 3 different bullet points. And with each bullet point, you should look for 5 different but relevant arguments or ideas from the text. Because this 25-mark question is divided into 50 marks for the content of your answer and 10 for the quality of your answer. And 3 times 5 is 15, which means you have to write about 5 points for each bullet point. I mean, it makes sense, right? With the 10 marks that are counting towards the quality of your writing, you should familiarize yourself with the text types that could come up in the exam. So the text types are letter, report, journal, speech, interview, or article. Make sure that you know how to write all of them, because any of the ones I just mentioned could come up in the exam. I remember I wasn't too confident about writing interviews before the exams, and I couldn't find any past papers on that. So I was literally digging really hard to find a practice question that I could practice writing interviews, because it is also something that we missed out in the lessons. And it turns out interview did come up in my exam. So always note your text type, kids. One more thing that's really crucial for this exam is the timing for each question. The exam is 2 hours long. Personally, I find it quite difficult due to the range of questions we have to answer. The timing structure I always followed is 10 minutes for the comprehension task, 10 minutes for the summary task, 10 minutes for the short answer questions again, and 30 minutes for language analysis, 45 minutes for directed writing. I tend to stay with the order of the question, but of course, if you want to do directed writing first, just do it. But make sure that you're limiting yourself with that time structure to not spend too much time on one question. If you do the math of the timing structure that I just mentioned, you'll realize that there's still 15 minutes left of the 120-minute long exam. But just to remind you, you also have 3 texts to read. And I normally spend 5 minutes for each one, and that leaves me no time to check over my answers. You might have a bit of time to go over your answer if you read one of the texts a bit faster or do one of the questions a bit quicker. But overall, I think it is a pretty intense exam. So keep an eye on the clock to make sure that you will finish the test in time. Now we have paper 1 out of the way. Let's talk about paper 2, the writing paper. I honestly find writing so much easier than the reading paper. You only have 2 questions. The first one is directed writing again. The text type for writing are only speech, letter, or article. Since it's a question on the writing paper, it will mostly test the writing ability of you instead of reading passages. While you have to read a passage to answer the question, your answer shouldn't be restricted to what's laid out for you in the passage. You have to expand your narrative and be more imaginative. For the next and also last question of the paper, it's writing composition. You will answer a question from the choice of 4 prompts that they give you, 2 narratives and 2 descriptives. For me, I always go to descriptive because I can't really think of a story right off my head in an exam condition. And descriptive writing won't ask you to have a complex and strong storyline, while I believe narrative method will. Also, to make it easier for me in the exam, I collected different descriptive paragraphs together and grouped them into a document, and I would go over these little extras during revision. They don't have to be extensively long, and some of them I have is just 1 or 2 sentences. If you're wondering where I found these descriptive paragraphs, some of them I found them when reading a novel or a book, but most of them were actually from the passages I practiced in reading papers. So this could be a trick for you. When practicing the reading paper, you could save these little descriptive extracts for later, since they're already filled with literary devices and full of imagery. So why not use them in your writing? Also, to be a step further, I converted the collection of paragraphs into audio files, so I can listen to them and ingrain the paragraphs into my brain. So during the exam, I would easily recall those different descriptive pieces and fit them in my writing. Of course, don't write them word for word. Otherwise, you'll be plagiarism. But in this way, it's easier to write some complex sentence structures and include some literary techniques without thinking too hard and spending too much time during the exam. And I think it's pretty clear that the timing for the writing paper is pretty straightforward. It's 2 hours again, and there's only 2 questions. So naturally, you should spend 1 hour for each question. Of course, if you finish your directed writing first, you can move on to the creative writing part of the exam, since people normally spend more time on it. And finally, in terms of resources, during my exam preparation period, I found the YouTube channel Igcse Success and Mr. Sellis. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Mr. Sellis, really helpful as they break down the exam paper into details and for each question. I will link their channel down below, and I will also include some website I found useful during my revision. Alright, this is the end of this long and extensive video on Igcse First Language English. I hope you guys find it useful, and leave your questions or comments down below. If you have any, I will try to reply to them all. And video requests such as Igcse Math or History is also welcome, but I might not have enough time to film it right now because I'm preparing for AS level at the moment. Anyways, good luck for your exams and see you soon.